afternoon. Welcome to the Peggy Browning workshop, where you will learn a lot about the Peggy Browning Fellowship Program and the Peggy Browning Fund as the history and the wonderful opportunities it presents to our students here at the Southern University Law Student Center and students all over the world. I have the honor of introducing our panel, Leontine Morgan, who is, I believe, a 2019 alumna of the Peggy Browning Fund. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
And an SULC alumna, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then we have Julie Cherry, which actually Julie is in law school now here at the Southern University Law Center. But she is the Secretary Treasurer of the AFL-CIO in Louisiana.
That's correct.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
All right. And then we have Ms. Chanel Staten, who is a current law student here at the Southern University Law Center and a alumna of Peggy Browning Fund from 2020, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, I am.
All right, great. And then we have Nikki. And Nikki plays a very important role at the New Orleans Workers' Rights Center. She just does everything. She's like in charge, large and in charge, does all the big advocacy work, research work, and it's just an honor to have you here. And then, of course, from Peggy Browning, we have Ruby Thomas, who Ruby just helps coordinate everything for us and make sure that we just get everything done in a timely manner. And she's just been a valuable resource for the Peggy Browning Fund.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Ruby. Now, so you probably say, well, why are we here and why are we trying to learn about the Peggy Browning Fund? Well, let me give you a little history about the Peggy Browning Fund. So the Peggy Browning Fund actually is a not-for-profit organization which was founded in 1997 in memory of Margaret A. Browning, who was a prominent labor attorney and a member of the National Relations Board, Labor Relations Board. She was actually the first labor side lawyer chosen for the National Labor Relations Board. And she unfortunately died at a young age due to breast cancer. And her husband, Joe Lurie, just wanted to keep her name out there in memory of her outstanding work as a lawyer. And so he got together some dedicated labor side organizations and lawyers and created the Peggy Browning Fund with the stated purpose of doing two things: developing law students as advocates for workplace justice, in other words, creating an ecosystem for a generation of those lawyers, and creating what is called the National Law Students Rights Conference, Workers' Rights Conference, which is an annual event which allows for all the Peggy Browning alums to come together and the Peggy Browning students who do summer internships. Now, basically, the fellowship program allows for students to consider labor law as a viable career option. And there are wonderful internships. If I'm not mistaken, last summer, Peggy Browning Fund did 90 or more internships across the country with very important labor organizations and Major League Baseball Players Association and law firms all over the country. And it provides stipends to students to do this all over the country. And this is significant because these are 10-week internships where students get some really, really important experiences. And although Peggy Browning Fund was challenged by COVID-19, it still carried out its mission this summer through a lot of remote internships for a lot of students. So it's a very valuable experience. Over 150 law schools participate nationwide with the program. And this year, the National Law Students Workers' Rights conference that's going to be held virtually in October, and we'll have more information about that so that you can join on. And we're lucky that we're part of the regional workshops. We're one of the regional workshop locations. There's only 2 this year in Louisiana. We're one of them, and the other one will be at Tulane Law School, I believe October 5th, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so you see, we're rocking and rolling. So that gives you a little history about the Peggy Browning Fund. In my mind, it is the top summer internship program in America. There's no doubt about it. I tell folks all the time. And if you really want to learn about advocacy, and if you're very interested in labor law, if you're not even sure about being interested in labor law, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to really, really learn about the Peggy Browning Fellowship. So I want to start out with a sort of a discussion with our esteemed panel. And I want to ask Chanel and Leontine, who are Peggy Browning Fund alums as fellows, what was their summer experience as a Peggy Browning Fund fellow? So Chanel, maybe Leontine, we'll start with Leontine, because since Leontine graduated already and she's out in the world and she can say what life is like after law school, having the experience of Peggy Browning Fund and maybe what benefit inured to her because of her experience.
Thank you, Chancellor Pierre. What I will say is, just in lieu of this COVID-19 era, it's raised a lot of issues and concerns in the workplace environment. During my time at Southern, I had the opportunity to work with the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs in Washington, D.C. as a Peggy Browning Fellow. And we worked on a number of issues that pertain, to life after law school as well, seeking gainful employment, and just navigating this technological era that we live in now in this environment, and like I like to tell a lot of my friends, your network is your net worth. So if anything at all, the Peggy Browning Fellowship gives students an opportunity to network with, top labor professionals, nonprofit organizations, which really give you a shoe in to these organizations like, the AFL-CIO and the New Orleans Center for Workers' Rights and Racial Justice. It gives you an opportunity to basically have your application put to the top of the pile because they know that you understand employment law, employment related matters like unpaid wages, discrimination, unemployment compensation. And it's just been really great for me in that regard. Being here now in Atlanta, Georgia, I'm on the cybersecurity side of things now. So I'm grateful for having had the experience of the fellowship because it's really opened a lot of doors for me after law school.
Great, great. And Chanel, you're currently still in law school and you had a great experience this summer. So why don't you tell students about your experience as a Peggy Browning Fund Fellow?
Yes, thank you, Chancellor Pierre. My experience this summer was at the Equal Justice Center in Texas. They are a nonprofit law firm that assists people and navigates through their unpaid or underpaid wages under FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. I found this fellowship to be immeasurable, regardless of what organization was my host, just to get an understanding of employee-employer relations and understanding just the expectation and the standard that employers should have and that they should uphold when dealing with their employees. Equal Justice Center has 4 offices. So there's Austin, Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston. And I was in Dallas, but I'm saying Austin because it was remote and virtual, we had the opportunity to work with staff attorneys across all 4 offices. So we were assigned cases not regarding where that case was, but just what attorney was working on that and what our interests were specifically. So I enjoyed the internship immensely. And we were talking before about how people treat others. And I think that this internship really does open your eyes to just how people are treated and how there are ways that people try to get over on other people and expecting them not to necessarily know their rights, and based on their immigration status, expecting them not to advocate for themselves, or finding ways to advocate for themselves, or avenues or paths for those things to happen. And so it just catapulted whatever I thought I wanted to do in the law. It just made everything more clear for me, and I'm just so happy to have been selected and had this opportunity.
Great. So both of you obviously had great experiences. So can you tell students how would they apply for a Peggy Browning Fund Fellowship, and what should they do in terms of putting things in their application that you think might enhance their chances of being selected as a Peggy Browning Fund Fellow? Leontine, why don't we start off with you?
Okay, so the first thing I would do is start compiling all of the paperwork, your cover letter, your resume, the application form, which I believe opens the first week in December. Put together a writing sample, something from your legal writing class. And in your cover letter, for me, I was a non-traditional student, so I put a lot of my life experience in it, such as things that I saw that happened during the hurricanes where I lived, and things that happened with undocumented immigrants. I would put things like that into the cover letter. The classes that you may be taking. Constitutional law plays a serious factor in labor and employment law. And then I would research the descriptions of the mentor organizations on their respective websites, as well as the websites, the Peggy Browning website, which this description of all the mentor organizations as well. And just start talking to people like myself, Chanel, Ms. Cherry, who are involved in labor and employment law right now. And just make sure that you get that in by January 15th, I believe, is the deadline, 2021. And just make sure you just focus on, what you have done in your past. And if that's not much involving labor and employment law, just speak to what has drawn you to apply, things that you may have heard, something that you may have heard with your professors, things like that. And I think that should pretty much get you straight.
Ms. Staten?
Yes, so Leontine covered quite a bit. There are just a few things I'd like to add to that. When you're looking at mentor organizations, you want to be able to frame those cover letters and your resume to fit those mentor organizations that you're applying for. So I applied for 3, and each of them were different. Each cover letter was different. Each resume was different. I will say that I was challenged because I do have a lot of life experience as Ms. Morgan, and work experience. I worked as a social worker for 10 years before coming to law school. So even being admitted to law school, it was challenging to shave that experience down. Not that it's not important, but some things are transferable and there are things that are not. And so you really want to focus on the transferable skills from the experience that you have, even if it's in leadership roles as an undergrad, or just different experiences that you had before applying to this, to convey to these mentor organizations the benefit that you would provide, that you would bring to their organization.
Thank you. Now, so Ms. Cherry and Ms. Thanos, each of you have a different role in the labor movement. Ms. Cherry directly with a labor union, and Ms. Thanos with a workers' rights center. Can you talk to us about your job and some of the tasks and issues that you handle on a day-to-day basis? Ms. Cherry, why don't you start off and lead us and tell us how your job works out? What are the tasks and issues that you handle on a day-to-day basis?
All right. Well, thank you, Chancellor Pierre. If I was standing in front of the group, I would ask first, who's familiar with the AFL-CIO? Because a lot of people aren't. What the AFL-CIO is the legislative and political umbrella organization for other labor unions like the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the United Steel Workers, the American Federation of Teachers, and so forth. We encompass a broad range of different types of employment. And the organization was formed to advocate for all workers in places where they normally can't be because they're working, like in the halls of the legislature and before boards and commissions. And so we advocate for policy and regulation rules that are beneficial to workers, specifically for our members, but over, history has shown that those gains that we make for organized labor members extend out into the population. So if you have, decent wages, if you have a 40-hour work week, if you have paid overtime, if you have paid annual and/or sick leave, if you have employer-sponsored health care, unions through the AFL-CIO advocated for the laws that provide for that, whether it was in the United States Congress, which the National AFL does, or within state legislatures, which is what a great amount of our time is spent doing here. In fact, we're starting a special session next week. So we're registered to lobby the legislature. In other places, like I mentioned, boards and commissions, I've been a member of the Workforce Investment Council. That is a group that statutorily has labor representatives on it, and they make decisions about how the state spends workforce development funds, including things like Perkins loans, which some people use, I think, for school. And I personally sit on the Workers' Compensation Advisory Council, which is a group of diverse stakeholders from industry, labor, medical providers, and so forth, to try to keep those laws where they serve everyone within the system. And our task is to advise the legislature on the eventual effects of those things. I could go on about more of these things, but that kind of gives a broad range of what we do. Personally, as the Chief Financial Officer, I also am responsible for budgeting and planning and all the federal filings required of labor organizations under the IRS and the United States Department of Labor.
Thank you. Ms. Thanos.
Well, good evening, everyone, and wanted to thank Chancellor Pierre for pulling us together, and also the staff at Peggy Browning. And I'm sorry that I can't see all the faces of the students, but excited to get to the Q&A and hear a little more how you all are receiving this information. So the first thing I want to highlight is that this is before I came to the Worker Center. I started having a conversation with folks across the country about some gaps in the social movement infrastructure to show up for low-wage workers, for workers of color, and particularly for nascent social movements, right? So we all know that there's like lots of lawyers in the United States, but it also seems like, for example, after the uprising in Ferguson, there was, lots of support nationally, and also particularly in places without a lot of infrastructure on the ground. The question is, how do you actually mobilize the support of a national a national infrastructure that doesn't quite exist yet? And so my approach at the Worker Center to our training, how we approach our Summer Institute, really came out of a lot of those conversations. And so the assessment is that we actually need to really invest in young lawyers at an early stage in their career. So the resources that Peggy Browning puts up and the investment that you see from the chancellor and other heads of institutions is really an important part of what I see as one of my core responsibilities, which is actually to build the field. So I'm not looking for interns who want to just come in and check something off on their resume box. I'm looking to welcome students in to give you a glimpse of what it's like to actually do this work in practice, and to really study together. And so we run our summer program as a sort of like a class, like more like a clinic class, where you get assignments, you get lots of feedback, but you're also reading and studying things like the history of social movements. What is the relevance of the labor movement in the 1960s to the labor movement today? I think that asking these core questions like, what is my theory of change, is something that's really missing from the social movement left, and it's certainly missing from the legal left, right? Like we need lawyers who are not just trying to solve problems one-on-one. And I love social workers, but not in a social work sort of way, right? Like we need social workers to do social work, and the work of social change has to go to the deeper systemic level. And so my organization, the New Orleans Worker Center for Racial Justice, came out of a post-Katrina landscape, which I'm guessing many of the students on this call lived through, in which in places like New Orleans, Black workers were locked out, right? So industries that had won gains, where there had been wage increases, improvements in the conditions of labor, were pretty much gutted overnight, right? So we saw like UTNO, the Teachers Union of New Orleans, pretty much decimated. And at the same time, immigrant workers were being systematically courted in, not just like in a casual way, like a cousin asking a cousin to come to town because they heard that there's work, but actually like, you know, from a legal sense, laws and policies reconfiguring themselves so that immigrant workers would come in and essentially set up a competition in the labor market where Black workers were getting pitted against immigrant workers. And so we started having a conversation with workers about who the bad guy really was, and asking critical questions about what it might mean for Louisiana if we started to build a base of low-wage workers that was united across race lines, right? So what would it look like if Black workers and immigrant workers started fighting together and started mobilizing campaigns in a unified way? So that's our origin story. It's a story that still feels really important. It's a story that I always tell when I talk about the Worker Center, because although we've grown over the years, the projects that we have, which today are 3, we house an immigrant worker project called the Congress of Day Laborers. It's mostly workers from Mexico and Central America. A lot of them came to New Orleans to rebuild after the storm and stayed here. We house a Black worker organizing project called Stand with Dignity that does work at the intersection of economic, racial, and criminal justice. And then we house a rural seafood worker alliance that is comprised of workers of mixed status. It's a lot of guest workers. So these are workers who are coming on legal visas from Mexico to do temporary work in the seafood sector. So if you're eating crawfish in Louisiana, unless you're eating imported crawfish from China, which you might be, but if you're not, you are eating crawfish likely that was processed by a worker who came on a guest worker visa from Mexico. And so we work on a model of, so the workers we work with are a little different than the worker base that Julie works with at the AFL. Our workers are mostly, they're contingent sector or excluded workers. So most of them there's not a union that they can join even if they wanted to join. They're workers like temporary workers, guest workers, workers who are working on part-time or kind of quirky contracts. I'm guessing the kind of workers that a lot of you know, right? Because unless you're from like the upper class, most of us have moms and cousins and probably ourselves who've worked in the kinds of jobs that don't necessarily have a union to back them up. And so, so that means there's some challenges and there's some real opportunities. And we try to expose our students to not just the work, but actually like the what of the work. So this is a filing, this is how you do a claim, but actually the thinking behind the work, right? Like how we do the work that we do and why we do it with an eye to organizing. And I think that that's probably something that makes the Worker Center a little different than some of the other host sites for Peggy Browning. So if you're a student that is interested in organizing and wants to see what it's like to, for example, develop, co-create law and organizing strategy in real time, the model that we have is pretty unique in the United States. We have a legal and policy department, which I direct, and then we also have an organizing team. So those organizers work in each of those 3 membership projects that I described. And then within those 3 projects, we have members. So we have people who are affiliated. So if you ever wake up and you're like, is my work important? Who cares about my work? Or is this policy paper I'm thinking about doing actually relevant for people's lives? Well, guess what do? You just, on Wednesday, you go down to the meeting. There's going to be a couple hundred people there and you can talk with folks about it. Julie has that benefit in her organization too. And I think that that level of accountability really distinguishes groups that are doing work rooted in organizing and building power from shops that do very important work and not knocking those models, but groups that are doing more work just in a policy domain. So if you're interested in organizing, the Worker Center is probably a good fit or a fit that you should think about. And I wanted to share just a couple examples of work that students worked on this summer, so you have an idea of what that work looks like in practice. We had students work on an emerging campaign. So sometimes you come into an organization and there's been something going for 5 years and people are always like, where did this come from? Where do you get these ideas? How do you figure out which legal strategies to layer on top of the organizing? But this was like one of those cases where everything was happening in real time. So I think most of you know that sanitation workers in New Orleans are on strike. They've been on strike for many months now. And have demands around access to PPE, $15 an hour, and some other claims. So one of the projects that my students worked on this summer was doing long form interviews. So they interviewed each worker for about 4 hours. So really long, looking at people's work history, injuries on the job, things like that. And then from there, starting to map out what possible legal claims they might have. So it was a really fun project. It involved lots of contact with workers, which is always fun. It's always, I think most of us like to get away from the computer sometime and engage with real people. And I think the value of doing interview work and client work is really important. And I'll tell you about one more thing and then turn it back over to the Chancellor. The second project that students worked on was with our seafood worker organizing project. So those guest workers from Mexico who are coming here to take the, to package up the crawfish, they were working, think about what a factory looks like. Even if you've never seen crawfish, you can sort of imagine what it might look like, right? Not designed for COVID times. You've probably heard a little bit about what's happened in chicken plants during COVID, right? Really cramped workspaces where people are working elbow to elbow. And the same sort of things that happened in chicken did happen here in crawfish also, where there were workers, literally like a whole plant of workers got COVID. But because those workers were immigrant workers, they face particular vulnerabilities, and that's where the Worker Center comes in. So we try to support workers in speaking out against workplace abuse. All the kind of crazy things that you think don't happen in 2020 definitely are happening. So we had workers this summer who were told that they would be fired if they didn't come to work, even though they told their boss that they had COVID. We had workers who were fired either for coming to work or not coming to work, or for asking for PPE, or just the whole litany of workplace abuses. And our students worked with us to do intakes with those workers. So they, again, got to work, many of them for the first time with an interpreter. So doing an interview in Spanish with someone who only speaks Spanish, taking their story, and then once again, trying to figure out what the avenues for relief are. And in this case, we wound up doing a number of agency complaints, mostly to agencies within the Department of Labor. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions also.
From the description you just gave and what we just heard from Ms. Cherry, that it's very obvious that if you're in support of social justice, This is work that's very, very important, and this is work that helps whole communities deal with a lot of different issues. So the question I think that we probably want to ask is, what are the best parts of your jobs and what are the most challenging parts of your jobs? Ms. Cherry, what's the best part of your job and what's the most challenging?
I get to work with some incredible people who have principles that I think that I admire, that I share, that I want to help spread the effect of. I didn't talk much about how we lobby, but we have a group that meets every morning during the legislative session, talks about the different bills and what our strategy is going to be. I wanted to tag on to what Nikki said about, this year the legislature proposed some legislation to limit employer liability for exposure to COVID. Those are the kinds of things that the union is still out there fighting for all workers. So the people, the principals, feeling like you're making a difference no matter how incremental the steps are, is very, very rewarding. You know that you're on the right side of justice, and I'm talking about economic justice, social justice, workplace justice, civil justice, all of it. They go hand in hand. They're fingers of the same glove, and they really do all belong together. I think the most challenging thing for me personally, and this is not just limited to work for me, is people who remain willfully ignorant. And I use those terms very, very purposely, deliberately. It's one thing if you don't know something, it's something else if you don't acknowledge it or try to correct your deficiency. In today's environment, many people are increasingly difficult to lobby or to advocate before, and I think that there's an increasing body of them. As I've been doing this work now for close to 20 years, it is a very, very partisan environment. It's not getting better, and people decide to stay right where they are, and that makes the work difficult.
Thanos, what about you? What are the best parts of your job? What are the most challenging aspects?
Well, I echo a lot of what Julie said. I think for me, one of the best parts of my job is just getting to work alongside the people I think are the modern day freedom fighters, right? Folks who are on the front lines, the folks who are every day looking themselves in the mirror and saying, hey, we're not perfect. We're making a lot of mistakes, but every mistake we make is one step, we're falling forward each time, right? We are we are making the road by walking. We're doing it in a model. Some of you may be familiar with Miss Ella Baker, who was an organizer in the Black Freedom Movement in the South. And she has a quote that I love. She said that, that give people light and they will find a way. Right? Give people light and they will find a way. I think that this is I have it up in my office. And for lawyers, I think it's an important message to look at every day because I don't see our role as we're not the fixers. We don't need to come in and solve every problem for folks. I believe that people know the solutions to their own problems, and the folks who are most closest to the pain often are most closest to the solution as well. So just getting to actually do that with my law practice, not having to sidebar or have like a double life where I'm doing one thing by day and then in my free time going off and being some other person that's more in alignment with my values, I think is a real privilege. And the challenge is in there too, because if you're doing something that really matters, it probably means that you're doing something that has never been done before. And that means that unlike a lot of lawyers who, many of them are my friends and people I love and people who I call all the time because they have higher levels of expertise within their niches of law. Most lawyers are doing one or two or five things, but they're sort of doing the same thing for a long time. And then they might pick up another thing and you get really good at the thing that you're doing. My practice is very different than that. I do a wide breadth of law. And we're constantly innovating the law. We are looking at, the Department of Labor's definition of labor trafficking, and actually just saying that definition doesn't work. It's not the right definition, and filing petitions with a different definition. And then somehow 3 years later, now we have a new pathway to citizenship for folks who we made up a new category of folks who were labor trafficked and who were civil rights defenders. That was something that our tiny little organization here did in Louisiana that has changed the landscape nationwide. And there's thousands of small victories like that that come from working in a shop that is really creative, is nimble, adaptive, and is willing to not just do the same things every day, but to look at the whole system and try to imagine ways to make interventions that really improve the material conditions of people's lives.
Hey, thanks a million. That was really very invigorating discussion. The Leontine and Chanel, obviously your internships were important internships. What were the best parts of your internships, and what were the most challenging parts of your internships?
Okay, for me, it was very difficult to hear workers tell us that someone wasn't paying them, and when they asked to be paid, this person said, "Oh, well, you're an undocumented immigrant, I'll just call ICE." Over the summer in DC, I was at Bread for the City Workers' Rights Clinic in Washington, DC, and we were basically tasked with assisting low-income workers with legal advice and assistance under the supervision of employment law attorneys. And just basically, just dealing with extreme conditions of being overworked and underpaid. So it was just a lot of unfair labor, just being underpaid. They were sometimes working in increments of 42 hours straight and just going from project to project with low pay and no overtime. So while at the committee, we had to prepare for litigation, class action, and we were able to sue and were able to get a substantial amount of money in back pay, and no one was deported, fortunately. So the most challenging aspect of it was bringing this suit and at the same time keeping people from being deported. Because they had a right to work and they had a right to be paid a fair wage for that work. But it was very rewarding just to talk to these individuals and provide one-on-one consultations and, under the assistance of these, supervision of these employment law attorneys. And we just assisted with all types of matters, which was very rewarding. It was employee-related matters such as unpaid wages, discrimination, violations of the Family and Medical Leave Act, unemployment compensation, workers' compensation. We had instances of sexual harassment, sick leave violations, and other barriers to employment. So that was the most exciting part about being a part of the committee. It's a nonprofit organization in DC, and they do truly great work in just bringing these class action suits against people who are, some of whom are billionaires, and they just refuse to pay people a fair wage for fair work. So for me, it led me into other areas of workplace concerns. So for me, I went into cybersecurity after law school. I'm now earning an LLM in cybersecurity and data privacy. And my concern now is cybersecurity and the workplace, because now you have employees who are applying for jobs, and a lot of people don't realize that when you apply for positions with an employer, you're basically giving away, your entire life, your name, your address, your social security number. In some instances, you're filling out I-9s, and this documentation is requiring a passport, a birth certificate. So now we have to look at many workers' expectation of privacy in the workplace, and how sometimes this expectation of privacy is at odds with an employer's obligation to maintain data security, which usually requires the imposition of certain monitoring requirements that ensure internal breaches do not occur. So going from dealing with unpaid wages to the cybersecurity side of it to, protect personal information of employees is just become the most exciting thing for me, because now you're talking about constitutional law, whether employees actually have a legal right to privacy. And this depends largely on where and how an employer is accessing an employee's personal information. Legally, there are some generally accepted rules of permissible employer monitoring now, which is mostly tied to widely accepted uses of technology like email. So now you're talking about a First Amendment issue, what you're talking about, what you're saying, and employers can monitor these things. They can monitor it on your use of internet, your use of email on their company network. And these things are the fruits of, identity theft. So, I learned about a lot of these things while at the committee. And that was the most rewarding part of it, knowing that I could transfer the tools that I used from, a low wage for low work for fair wage for fair work, and then transfer that into cybersecurity. So that was what was most rewarding for me, just learning about the different aspects that encompass labor and employment law.
Thank you. Ms. Payton?
Okay, so for me, the most, exciting or rewarding aspect of my fellowship at the Equal Justice Center was the variation of cases that I was assigned to. So when you think of employer, employee, you think of a corporation or a company. But I had the privilege of working on a case where it was a residential facility that had an academic program within the residential facility. And so the children were receiving therapeutic services, they were going to school, everything was combined. However, the center was also having them do chores and working, lifting hay, taking hay across the campus, and they were distributed Burke books, which was like to be spent in the, the commissary. Like they would be able to spend that money to buy toiletries and different personal needs that they may want, but they were not being compensated appropriately for the work they were doing. And so that just gave me a different idea of employer-employee relations and how I think that a lot of employers try to use immigration status or ICE or different other, what other people would see as like limitations. So these are children. So are these children going to find advocacy to make sure that they get the monies or the payment or compensation that they deserve? And so I thought that was a complete eye-opener for me, a complete different perception of what employer-employee relations are, to working on a case where learning about mechanics liens. So mechanics liens are individuals who will contract with a contracting company. So they bid for a job. This is a contractor whose bid was accepted by this other contracting company, and they are not paid. And after a certain period of time, you can file a mechanics lien so that that larger company pays you for the work that you've done. And that mechanics lien can also give you ownership of that property that you were working on also. And I thought that just the variation of the cases that I saw, that I had the opportunity to work on and work with the staff attorneys on, was amazing. But that lends to the same thing Leontine said, just like the treatment of these people, of the children, of workers, of how employers could be multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar companies, and they are trying to get this work for free, are trying to take advantage of children who are already disadvantaged. Like these children are in this residential facility because they have some mental health challenge, some type of family challenges. It's just amazing that, I mean, that was the largest challenge that I had, just hearing the stories, and it was a lot. But I think that the most exciting thing is that we were able to advocate for them and help them understand that they too can advocate for themselves, and to empower them to advocate for themselves. Like, this is not how you should be treated, and these are things that you can say, or these are things you can do, and if you're not comfortable doing them, we are here to assist you with that. It just gives you a certain level of confidence, I think, for any of us. If you're like in a situation where you're not clear on your next steps, it's always nice to have like a friend or someone who's more informed on the matter to be like, hey, Ruby, this is what this is. I'm not you, but these are the next steps. Like, it gives you a certain level of confidence in moving forward in that matter. And I just, it was challenging, but rewarding in the sense that that was able to take place. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So if someone is interested in a labor career path, labor law, labor advocacy, how would you advise Ms. Cherry and Ms. Thanos, someone, one of our students, how would they get into this career path or job related to this? And what would be your suggestion about what they could be doing while they're in law school, maybe courses they could be taking that would help prepare them for an opportunity to be involved in the labor movement, either the labor law, labor advocacy, lobbying, you name it. What would you say?
Well, I've had a completely untraditional path myself, so I will offer where I am with that. Never in my life would I have dreamed that I would end up being a union official. There were no union members in my family. My parents were both kind of middle management. And so it was outside of my consciousness. It was not something really that we learned in school, not that I recall in any real tangible way. But I married a union sheet metal worker. We raised a family together. I didn't work full time until my last child went to school, and I was 33 then. I had worked part-time for my entire life before that, since I was 16. But I went to teach in the public schools then, and I joined the teachers union. So this is already going to be outside of where people are right now, probably, who are listening to this. But I became active in my union, and when the building rep where I was teaching left, she asked me to become the building rep, and I did, and I got more and more active in the union, and people noticed my desire to learn, people who were in places that could promote me and mentor me. I wasn't necessarily looking for that, but you can look for that. You can look for mentors. I mean, how many of you don't like it when somebody feels like they have something to learn from you? Everywhere I go and everyone I meet, I feel like I have something to learn from them. I am like a child still in that way. I'm excited about learning. I like learning about people. I like learning about how things are done. And so I ended up developing a passion for this kind of work as I had an increasing awareness of the plight of workers. So eventually, when the president of the union retired, he asked me to run. I became the president of the local, and I lost my reelection bid and went back to the classroom. At that point, I sought a job at the AFL-CIO where I was able to advocate not just for teachers, but for the range of other workers that I mentioned to you. But over the course of time, and Nikki's really the one that's bringing this back to me, labor in the South is a small organization. We're nonprofit also. Our union density in Louisiana is about 5%. But in politics, politics and legislation is how things change. Politics, legislation, and jurisprudence. If the law is not serving the people, you have to change the law. It happens incrementally. You join together with people who have like interests. We've worked with Fight for 15. We've worked with Step Up Louisiana that wants us to have safe workplaces for every worker. So you find those friends and you form those relationships. So what I would advise, besides coming to events like these and applying for the fellowships and the internships, you know, the courses you take at school, workers' comp, labor and employment, and administrative law, because a lot of the detail in the law is supported by the rulemaking process. And Nikki talked about, she called them small wins about the definitions of labor trafficking. That's really not a small win, because that becomes something that you can hang your hat on, that's enforceable. It gives someone an avenue for redress. And it doesn't take too many of those penalties enforced for employers to wake up. You all have talked about marginalized workers. Alien workers are marginalized whether they're documented or undocumented, but the plight of the undocumented is the worst. And because, you know, Leontine talked about constitutional law, I was thinking about this earlier today. The federal government occupies the entire area of immigration. So those federal laws are not enforceable by the states. That's where we need changes. If an employer is allowed to oppress a group of people because they don't have documents, and they do that by paying less than minimum wage, they don't pay workers' comp, they don't pay into unemployment, they don't pay into Medicare, they cheat responsible employers, and they oppress the legal workers who are documented and who are citizens because they artificially suppress wages. So the activism needs to be on the ground. There does need to be organization, and there needs to be a legislative and political agenda. Elections count. The only votes that aren't counted are the ones that aren't cast. People need to register. We need to educate people who feel like they're disenfranchised, but again, there's an ignorance, and it's up to people who are really passionate advocates to be a part of the education effort too.
Thanks, Julie. I would just add 3 things. The first is that you've got to be a lifelong learner. I just learned a lot listening to Chanel and Leontine, this idea that you only learn from people who are somehow older and wiser than you. Like, you got to let that go. Like, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. You are the ones that are going to be part of changing the world. And no one's going to just present all the answers to you. Like, you got to have that thirst to go out and try to figure things out. And the second is to ask questions. You know, the questions that you ask are going to lead you, they're going to lead you on your career path. They're going to help you become a better person. And I think one of the deficits in law school, which I don't think is as acute at your university, and you're lucky because of this, but I think that there's a tendency to just look at legal, legal methods of analysis as the only methods of analysis. And real problem solvers are interdisciplinary. Like, if all you're doing is looking on LexisNexis and Westlaw, you're probably not getting as deep as you need to go into an issue. Like, you need to be in the social science databases. You need to be looking at data. You need to be looking at political science, at sociology, at philosophy, at political theory. And so there's just a thirst there to be like a thirst for knowledge and a real curiosity about the world that I think separates folks from, you know, folks who just like do great stuff from folks who like actually are a part of big structural changes in their life. And then the last thing that I think matters is that you have to show up. Like, this work is not, I get emails all the time from people asking if I can be their mentor. And I'm down to have a conversation with anyone, but the first thing I asked is, what have you already done? How are you showing up for the things that you think you might be interested in? And so that means lots of different things. And I don't, certainly my organization is not the only organization you can show up for, but go read the things, go to the events, talk to workers, get engaged, volunteer, get an internship. As much as you're able to get practical skills in law school, take advantage of those opportunities, because I was shocked as soon as I graduated that people started giving me real stuff. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's no 3-year residency for law students where you get to practice like you do in law school, in med school, under the supervision of someone. A lot of us are really just thrown into practicing. And so I know that the chancellor and the staff at your university have a faculty that's really committed to your development. So take advantage of that while you still are sort of in the cocoon of law school. Start, as much as you can, work with a professor on real life stuff, right? And write a paper that's relevant to something that's happening in real time. Take on cases, do clinical work. All those things will really set you up, and they'll also better position you to get jobs when you get out of school. I just hired someone for a staff attorney position that where I was looking for someone who was 1 to 3 years out of law school, and I hired someone right out of law school, but it was someone who she went to Northeastern, so she had done a lot of clinical and practical work, and she had 5 years experience before law school, and she had really solid summer experiences on projects that I could see her work products. So she felt to me like someone with 1 to 2 years experience as opposed to someone right out of law school. And I think that that's accessible to most of you.
Thanks a million. So what are the different types of jobs that students can pursue if they want to utilize their law degree to advocate for workers' rights? Give some examples.
Well, Chancellor, I was astonished last year when I went to the workshop, to the conference, that as I mentioned, the labor density is small here, that there are actually unions that have in-house attorneys. We don't have that kind of opportunity here in Baton Rouge, but there are people who do labor and employment work. Working in governmental positions is exposure for a lot of this, and a lot of people can find those jobs out of law school where they're working for an agency and they can learn the administrative side of things. There was legal work helping unions with pensions and health and welfare funds, because those all have a lot of legal ramifications. And while it's not the same kind of on the ground work that for instance, Nikki is doing, it's important work, because there are attacks on pensions all across the country, and retirement with dignity is one of our principles. You shouldn't work your whole life and then have to worry about whether you can feed yourself or buy your medicine. So that is what I know from this part of the country. But, like I said, some of these people have worked in other, I think we had somebody go to California, and then there was a young person who spoke who'd worked with an SEI union that had not one, but I think 10 in-house attorneys with the national union. That was just amazing to me. I didn't, I told y'all I was non-traditional. I didn't go to work full time until I was 33. Well, I went to law school at 58. I think I'm an example of that thirst. I'm an example of the desire to keep learning and to keep making a contribution. And there's never a time when you can't. Everyone can do something. I just feel amazed and grateful and blessed to be where I am, to be able to be in law school. And thank you for asking me to do this. I hope that I've contributed something.
Thanks a million. Leontine and Chanel, both of you had careers before you came to law school. So tell us how those careers helped you in terms of your fellowship with the Peggy Browning Fund, and kind of where you're pursuing your options now?
Okay, so for me, I waited tables, and being a non-traditional student, I came into law school when I was 38 years old. So I had already been, in the hospitality industry the previous 10 years, and at a time where we were making $2.15 an hour, plus tips. And sometimes, if someone didn't come into the restaurant, you didn't. All you have is that $2.15 an hour. And we all know that that's not enough to pay really for anything. So I put that into my cover letter, and it just brought a lot of insight into a fair wage for fair work. This whole thing about, $7.25 an hour and having to fight for $15 an hour, that it was ingrained in me very early on, and then there were times, before I came to law school where I was unemployed, and, unemployment itself is not just a loss of income. It can be a loss of an individual's sense of self. Unemployment is associated with a variety of problems and pathologies, from, higher divorce rates, higher suicide rates, to incidences of alcoholism, and the correlation is that there is a causal connection between, a general happiness and sense of self-worth with gainful employment. So I brought that with me to law school, and I made sure that I put that into that social justice aspect into my cover letter. People are generally happier when they are gainfully employed, and that someone recognizes their contributions to society, and by respecting them and paying them. This is something that was very important to me. I had all of that experience, but it wasn't until Chancellor Pierre said, hey, I think you should, go to this this workers' rights conference, up in Maryland. I think you need to learn about labor and employment law. And I hadn't really thought about it, even though I had this significant experience. And it was because I went to this conference and had an opportunity to learn more about what labor and employment law is, that it catapulted me to where I am now, which is looking at cybersecurity and the workplace. Because now we're in this technological era where we have to balance privacy, security, and technological innovation. And to piggyback off of what Nikki said and Ms. Cherry said, earlier, you have to keep learning in this field. This field is not for the faint of heart. You're going to hear stories and things that are happening to people that you wouldn't think are really happening in this world that we live in. So you want to, as a student, you want to focus on classes like constitutional law. You want to focus on your legal writing classes, contracts, law and technology, human rights, and take the hard professors. You may not want to, but, I can say with a degree of certainty that if it wasn't for, Professor Regina James, difficult, but phenomenal professor when it comes to constitutional law. So now I understand the concept of free speech, the concept of the right to privacy, and how it affects employees in the workplace, and those who are undocumented, who also have a right to work and be paid a fair wage for fair work in this country. So, I hope that answers your question, Chancellor.
And Ms. Staten?
Well, for me, I think Ms. Cherry and I are both in that con law class with Professor Ramsey right now. It's a lot. It's thorough, and I appreciate it. For me, as a social worker, in coming to law school, I've always wanted to be an attorney, but I didn't know necessarily what I wanted to do. And it's changed a lot, even before I came to law school, but I sought to couple social work in law some kind of way. Whereas Nikki was saying, the movement for social change and social justice a lot of times does come through social work, but there's another level. And so as a social worker, I realized that there was something else greater that I needed to be doing in order to actually get to that place. So for me, this fellowship, there was a lot of inconsistencies as a social worker, just working at agencies where treatment plans were expired. And so in the grand scheme of things, that we're talking about treatment plans that were funded by companies or agencies that were funded by Medicaid primarily, right? So if your treatment plans are expired and Medicaid comes to audit that organization, you're looking at the organization being closed for a period of time, if not permanently, and the entire population that you're serving being without services. We're talking about mental health and behavioral services, psychiatric services, medication management. So when you look at things like when I was very upset, and knowing that my clients are at risk of not being served because the supervisors are not checking these treatment plans. If there's 5 supervisees on your role as a supervisor, then every day of the week you should be going into that room, that closet that we had at the agency, and making sure that everybody on that person's caseload, that their treatment plan was in compliance. And when I think about it on a larger scale, like just thinking about all the companies and organizations that have these populations or these groups of individuals or people, whether it be employees or agencies such as social service agencies that they're serving, and if you fall out of compliance and fall out of regulation, then that completely eliminates that service from those individuals' life, right? And so I am interested in compliance and regulatory affairs, and making sure that companies, agencies, organizations, whatever, what have you, are doing what they're supposed to do to make sure that who they're serving and their purpose is being fulfilled under the law. It's like, even just like the case with the school that is a residential therapeutic center, like those things should not happen, you know? And I think that sometimes when I talk to my family and friends, they're like, well, you know, that's the way of the world, but it's not okay. And I don't speak from a place of naivety or utopia. I think that there's just certain ways to treat people and to operate with people, and you can't do those things if you're not following the law. And the law is there for a reason, whether we agree with it or not. Like, the regulations are in place for you to be compliant with them. And if you're not, then everyone, the whole purpose, the whole idea, the whole motto is a sham. And I just want to hold people accountable. That's all. Whether it be hospitals or whatever, what have you. Like, I think that people need to really be held accountable, especially in the social climate where there seems to be a lack of.
Great. So we'll open the floor for questions. I was able to look at some of our attendees. I know we've got some bright folks. So I know, like someone like Miss Ebony Cormier, she's got a lot of good questions. I'm going to pick on Miss Cormier and Mr. Darius Holiday, because I know Mr. Mallard, I know they've got wonderful questions that they want to pose to this panel. So don't be shy. I know it's raining and stormy outside. I'm looking at the storm. See, Leontine, you're in Atlanta and it's nice. But right now it's storming. It's, you know that old song, it's a rainy night in Georgia. Well, it's raining here. Any questions? No questions? I can't believe that. Folks probably trying to figure out whether or not there's a tornado coming, right? And they say, let me. Darius Holiday. What are some of the ways that students can become involved with labor unions while in school? So what are some of the ways, Ms. Cherry?
Well, I'm glad that Darius is asking that question, as you and I have been talking about some ways that we might interface either through Peggy Browning or some other method. If Where we particularly need help at the AFL sometimes is with tracking and following the legislation. As I said, we get together every morning and we go through the list of legislation and we assign the bills to different people to read them and report back on them. But sometimes this is one of the ways I was hoping, Chancellor, that we might be able to work with Peggy Browning, with some of my affiliates across the South. That's a big part of what we do at the AFL. We also have a lot of volunteer efforts, and I don't know whether we usually look for people outside of our membership, but for instance, after the floods here in Baton Rouge, a group of retirees, believe it or not, from the plumbers and pipe fitters organized a group to go into the Glen Oaks area and help some of those folks gut their houses, just doing the physical on the ground work. And we had a couple of folks from our national who went with us to do that. We're organizing some efforts to bring relief into Lake Charles right now, and we've had financial support from all over the country, other unions sending a little, $1,000 here, $500 there, and we turn it around into gift cards and water and tarps and things like that. That's more on the social justice end than on the labor end, but our feet are on the ground and we have people, and those are the kinds of things that we do.
Okay. Cormier asks, are there opportunities to work with lobbyists on Capitol Hill to advocate for employee rights from a policy perspective? Ms. Morgan, you did a little bit of that, didn't you?
I did, yes. We had an opportunity to advocate on Capitol Hill. So the biggest issue that, that comes with advocating on Capitol Hill is sometimes it tends to fall on deaf ears. The best thing that you can absolutely do is apply for, I would start with the Peggy Browning Fellowship with the unions and nonprofit organizations that are the mentor organizations on the website that are in DC. Almost all of them, it's my understanding that almost all of them are advocating on Capitol Hill, from the Brotherhood of Teamsters to the AFL-CIO in DC. I know the Washington Lawyers Committee does it all the time. And if you want, you can also just go up to Capitol Hill and you're able to advocate personally. You can speak to any senator, any representative, you just make an appointment. But it is always best if, you go with a group of people, because there are strengths in numbers. It was very, very difficult for us to, like I said previously, bring a suit where we had undocumented immigrants, and we had to bring this case for them to get their work without them being deported. So, we had to go on Capitol Hill and talk to a few individuals, less than savory individuals, who really didn't want to hear what we had to say because these people were not citizens. So, but we had the numbers. So the best thing I would say is to look up the organizations on the website, on the Peggy Browning website, that are in DC, and apply for the fellowship with these organizations, because almost all of them are advocating on Capitol Hill.
And then, Ms. Cherry, you do that on the state side.
Yes, we do.
Hill, called downtown in Baton Rouge, that Capitol, right? That tall.
Yes.
And
that tall building that has all the crazy people in it. I didn't say that out loud. Yes, and we have found out that one of the most effective ways of lobbying is if people call their own rep, or their own senator on issues, because if they get multiple calls, even 5 on something, most things, there are hundreds of bills that go through every year and they never get any calls on them. If you have a group of people that all came from Alexandria or whatever, and they want to call the reps from that area, like Mr. Larvadan or Mr. Harris, who isn't there now, if the group calls people, it makes an effect, because they know that someone is watching what they're doing. especially there. You don't have to be a registered lobbyist to lobby your own senator and representative. And you can get, this is one of the ways that unions are effective. It's the family and friends movement. You know, talk to people at your church, talk to your family, talk to your friends about the things that are important. It's part of education and it's part of mobilization. If you can get more people to make those calls and not just you, it works. It's old school, but it works.
Now, in addition to Ms. Morgan and Ms. Staten, obviously we had other law students that are still in law school who did Peggy Browning fellowships. We have Mr. Mason, I believe, who did a fellowship. We had Miss Molly Pons, who did a Peggy Browning fellowship. Miss Pons, are you with us? Maybe we can unmute her, see if she can talk a little bit about her experience. There she is.
Hello.
Pons.
I'm here. How are you guys?
All right.
So
because you did some stuff on Capitol Hill also. Miss Pons has been Capitol Hill, federal courts. I mean, she's just kind of done a little bit of everything.
Yes, I have done a lot, but specific to this conversation, Nikki Thanos, who's no longer on the panel currently, was my supervisor this summer at the New Orleans Workers Center for Racial Justice. So it was a great experience for me, and what she definitely capitalized on was the fact that at least her program specifically was like a clinical setting, so you're really able to learn, and there was a lot of room for growth and just exposure. I have done a lot, but a lot of my stuff has been in the Black struggle, and so it was a whole new scene for me to take on workers' rights. And I really appreciated just the space to grow and truly learn, especially being new to New Orleans or to Louisiana, so I don't know anything about seafood. That was an interesting time, and I really enjoyed my time with Peggy Browning.
All right. Well, great. Miss Staples, I haven't heard from you. You got anything, Miss Staples? You want to ask any questions? You want to learn anything? Don't be shy, Miss Staples.
I am a little shy. It seems like a lot. Commitment. I do myself enjoy the what I call re-educating myself, continuing education. That's what I want to say. So I appreciate you guys and what you're doing. I have been in supervision and management. I'm also an older adult student. So I thought this would be very applicable to making sure I give my employees exactly, everything they need as far as on that side, being fair, honest, and trying to take care of their needs as well as the organization that I work for. So make it a twofold type of thing.
Oh, great. So some quick reminders, and maybe Ruby, you can come in and chime in and tell us all the important things, like when is the National Workers' Rights Conference again?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So the Workers' Rights Conference, it is normally held right outside of DC in Baltimore, but it's going virtual this year. So we're hoping to open up registration super soon, hopefully tomorrow or on Friday. And that will be taking place on Friday, October 16th, Saturday, October 17th, and Sunday, October 18th. And so we'll have a combination of different plenaries. Obviously, this will all be online, super accessible. We're hoping to do different workshops, kind of intro to basic labor law, introduction to protecting and organizing immigrant workers. A bunch of different things will all be listed on our website. And we also hope to plan some meetup groups, so there'll be breakouts and hopefully some networking, although it's a little different, obviously, in the Zoom world. But we're super excited, and as I said, keep an eye. I think all the attendees, I have your email addresses now, so I will definitely be sending emails when that's open. And of course, our fellowships looking into 2021 for the summer, they'll be opening around December. And then that deadline is January 15th. But everything that you need is on the website. And we'll, of course, be sending out information as it comes out.
Great.
Nancy, do you mind if I say one more thing?
I'm sorry? Yes.
I just want to say that Ruby, through this entire process, has been very supportive and genuine in her support, and her communication skills are top notch. I will say, as far as the interview process, you have 3 days to respond to any mentor, and that came as a surprise to me, and I was somewhat overwhelmed. I had to reject an interview because it was just a lot. And I appreciate you, and I want everyone to know that she is, if you have any questions, even before you submit your application or anything like that, that she's open and willing to answer any questions. As I can speak for myself, I am too. There was a student, Derek West, who was a PBF fellow before me, who helped me completely through this process. And so I would lend myself, my assistance in any application questions you might have for that. But Ruby, you are awesome, girl.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. And just to everyone who's listening, when you apply for a fellowship, we are always thinking about what is best for the students. So just like what Chanel said, it's often that our students are so amazing that they get multiple offers, and we are super transparent. We want to make sure you have the best experience for your fellowship, because that is our overall goal. So I'm so lucky to work with so many amazing people and support our fellows and our board members and the people who come to the conference and everyone. So I'm super happy, and you'll definitely all be receiving emails.
Just to piggyback off of what Chanel said, I agree. Ruby, you're absolutely amazing to work with, and it was really a privilege, and I appreciate everything that you did.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And your energy is infectious. It's absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, dude, everyone here is such a pleasure to work with. I'm so honored. It's easy to work when you're working for good people. So.
Absolutely. Yes. So thank you. And if anyone needs to contact me, feel free. Email, LinkedIn, I'm here.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Mary Johnson and Ms. Marla Dickerson. Dr. Johnson has been working with Ruby on this project, and going back to last year, really did a great job in organizing when we could do it face to face. And this year, because of the great work of Marla Dickerson and the CLE department, directs, and just helping, like, for example, putting together this platform for us to do what we're going to do. And maybe, I think we're going to be able to work this out when the National Workers' Rights Conference is held. We'll be hosting on the platform here. I think we can work it out. I think we can make that happen. All kinds of great things, and I just want to thank her and her staff for all of the work that they've been doing in relation to this. I want to thank all of the panelists for their time, and you really help us do so many great things, because you're just bringing your authentic selves and talking to students and making good things happen. And I think we've got some great students that are really helping us do things that we can make really transformational change in this country. Because the work that's being done, especially now where we're seeing so many workers, frontline workers who could not protect themselves from a very deadly disease. And sometimes it seems that worker safety was abandoned. The fact that organizations that are part of the Peggy Browning Fund network that students get to intern for are on the front row of protecting those rights front lines of protecting those rights, that it's really, really important to see how this can be very, very impactful. So Ruby, you got any last words as we wrap up here?
No, I would just like to second your thanks, Marla and Mary Johnson. It's so wonderful to work with them. They're amazing. John Pierre, you were always amazing. It was really cool to be able to sit in and actually see this in action. And everyone on the panel, Julie and Nikki who had to leave, amazing. And of course, Leontine and Chanel, it was great. So thank you all so much. And this is so appreciated.
Yeah. And let me just say this to those of you, I know we've all got a lot of things going on. This has been sort of a very challenging semester with all the different issues we got to deal with. The fact that we could pull this off and do this. And for those of you, I want to thank those of you who joined as attendees. I hope you, and tell your friends. And one of the things I hope you all get to do, and I'm pretty sure we will when we have the National Workers' Rights, is you need to meet Joe Lurie. If you ever want to be inspired, meet Joe Lurie. This man is he doesn't get tired. He's dedicated. He's just got such a love affair for what he does. That it just will make you really become inspired. The fact that he's done all of this great work over the last, 40 plus years and time that he worked, but more importantly, from the time that he started the Peggy Browning Fund, really is inspiring to me. And I think you should all be lucky to have a chance to meet really what I consider a living legend. Sometimes, we never get to know who living legends are. This man, in my mind, is a living legend. So I want to thank you all for joining us. We will be able to, I guess, get more out of it. Sign up for that National Workers' Rights Conference. We'll be sending out information, and it's a good thing. And I think you will all benefit greatly. Tell your friends about it. It's a great opportunity. It's a great way to really do something that you can be passionate about and really develop your skills. So I say we've reached the end of the time. Marla, is there anything else you want to add? Ms. Dickerson?
I have 2 Zooms going on, so I was trying to hurry up and get off. We're having a Zoom with our Rawl and Henderson partnership. But no, so this was fantastic listening to both sessions, but yeah, so.
All right, well, great. Take care, stay dry, and stay well.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Everyone.
Thank you.
So much.
Bye.